This morning was no different from hundreds of others. Summer in the small town of Auburn, Washington always began quietly. People were rushing to work, children were getting ready for school. The air was filled with the smell of freshly cut grass and morning coffee. For Susan Snow, this day seemed ordinary too. She was a 40-year-old mother, hardworking, serious, but at the same time with a kind smile that all her neighbors knew. Susan got up early. Her 15-year-old daughter Haley was sleeping quietly in the house, and Sue decided to take a shower while the bathroom was empty. She felt a little unwell, headaches had become a regular companion lately, and so she did what she always did. She took a bottle of Excedrin tablets from the medicine cabinet, a common painkiller sold in every store. Nothing unusual, just another pill for the pain. A few minutes later, Haley woke up from a strange sound. The shower continued to run, but her mother did not answer. The girl knocked on the door softly at first, then louder. Finally, plucking up her courage, Haley opened it and saw what she would forever remember. Susan was lying on the bathroom floor, the water running past her motionless body. Her mother's eyes were closed, her skin pale, her breathing barely perceptible. Haley screamed and ran to the phone. Her voice trembled as she told the 911 operator, "My mother. She's not breathing. Please help." A few minutes later, a siren was heard in the house. Neighbors peered out of their windows, not understanding what had happened. Paramedics climbed the steps, rushed into the bathroom, and began resuscitation. Time passed by in seconds, but Susan's condition was critical. They decided to urgently send her to the hospital by helicopter. Haley stood on the porch and watched her mother being carried away on a stretcher. The girl did not understand why everything had changed so quickly. Just a while ago it was a normal morning, and suddenly, a nightmare in which it was impossible to wake up. First guesses. The doctors at the hospital assumed a stroke or a heart attack. The symptoms seemed similar. Sudden loss of consciousness, a sharp deterioration in condition. But something still did not add up. Susan never complained of serious heart problems. Yes, there was stress, headaches, fatigue from work and caring for her daughter, but nothing critical. A few hours later, terrible news came. Susan had died. For Haley, it was like falling into an abyss. The world collapsed in an instant, and there was no light ahead. But the story did not end there. On the contrary, at this very moment it was just beginning. A strange detail. The doctors who performed the autopsy noticed an unusual circumstance. When Susan's body was opened, one of the pathologists caught a faint smell in the air, bitter almonds. It was an alarm signal familiar to every specialist. The smell of almonds often accompanies cyanide poisoning. Could it be a coincidence? The pills that Susan was taking looked quite ordinary. No one would suspect them of being dangerous. But blood and stomach contents tests confirmed the worst fears. The woman died from a lethal dose of cyanide. Now everything was changing. It no longer looked like an accidental stroke. The doctors and police were faced with the question: who put poison in an ordinary medicine and why? Panic in the city. The news spread like wildfire. Newspapers and television began talking about the possibility of poisoned Excedrin tablets on sale. People threw their packages in the trash. Pharmacies removed them from the shelves, and real panic began. The FBI joined the investigation because the case was reminiscent of the horrific events of 4 years earlier, the Tylenol murders in Chicago, where several people died from capsules contaminated with cyanide. America was once again on the brink of mass hysteria. And yet for Haley Snow, this was not about newspapers and television. For her, this was a personal tragedy. Her mother died a horrible death, and she herself accidentally witnessed the beginning of this story. She did not yet know that Susan's death was only the first thread in a much darker and more tangled web, where greed, betrayal, and carefully planned murder were involved. After Susan Snow's death, the investigation was taken over by the police and the FBI. At first, it looked like a tragic accident. A woman alone at home suddenly felt ill and died, but the autopsy revealed unexpected details. The pathologist conducting the examination smelled bitter almonds, a characteristic sign of cyanide. This immediately changed the course of the investigation. From an accidental stroke, the case turned into a poisoning in which every detail could be key. The police began to question relatives, friends, and neighbors. Haley, Susan's daughter, tried to explain how the morning went. The girl remembered that her mother took a bottle of Excedrin from the medicine cabinet and took a regular pill. At first, it seemed like a trifle, a regular drug that tens of millions of Americans used every day. But it soon became clear it was the drug that was the source of the poison. Analysis showed that cyanide was added to the pills, and it was a deadly dosed poison. Massive panic. The news of possible poison pills spread quickly. Pharmacies began checking their stocks, stores recalled batches of Excedrin, and the media maintained an alarming background, recalling the tragedy with Tylenol in the early 1980s. The FBI and food safety experts joined the investigation. All remaining bottles with the same lot number were seized. The details of the investigation shocked even experienced specialists. Pills with a lethal dose of cyanide were found in 5 different places, and 3 of them had already led to death. The appearance of Stella Nickell. The first clues led investigators to Stella Nickell, a woman whose life and motives seemed completely ordinary at first glance. She claimed to have bought several bottles of Excedrin of the same lot in different stores. At first glance, nothing suspicious. But the attention of the police was drawn to a strange pattern. All the poisoned pills were somehow connected to her actions. Stella claimed that she needed to take care of her husband's health and that she had no intention of harming anyone. But the examination showed that the contaminated pills had been carefully processed, indicating planning and premeditation. Unexpected evidence. Among the confiscated bottles, green crystals were found, an algicide used to clean aquariums. This strange component gave the examination important confirmation. The poison was added artificially at home. In addition, detectives found documentary evidence that Stella Nickell may have had a financial motive. The insurance payment in the event of her husband's death could have been a significant sum. It became clear that this was no longer just an accident, but a carefully planned crime. Complex moral dilemma. For Haley Snow, all this was not just an investigation. The girl who lost her mother found herself embroiled in a story full of lies, intricacies, and secrets. Her own observations and memories became key evidence, and the public became witnesses to the unfolding drama. Every day of the investigation revealed new details. Who else might have suffered, which batches of pills might have been dangerous, and how quickly the crime could have become a large-scale tragedy for other people. After the initial tests and analysis of the Excedrin bottles, the investigation took a new turn. The police and the FBI began to focus on a woman who, at first glance, seemed ordinary. Stella Nickell. Her life was routine, unremarkable: home, husband, family. But a number of small coincidences and strange circumstances led investigators to the idea that she could be connected to the tragedy. Secret motive. Investigators found out that Stella's husband, Bruce Nickell, had a small insurance policy. In the event of his death, his widow could receive a large payment, about $100,000. At first glance, the amount did not seem huge, but for Stella it was an opportunity to solve financial difficulties. The test showed that Bruce Nickell died before Susan, and although his death was initially considered natural, an autopsy and additional tests soon revealed the presence of cyanide. This was the first clue. All the events could be connected. First suspicions. Investigators noticed Stella's strange behavior. She claimed that she had bought contaminated pills in different stores by accident, as if trying to check the quality of the product for her husband. But experts noticed a pattern. All the batches of pills that turned out to be fatal somehow passed through her hands. Forensic chemical analysis showed that the poison was added at home. Algicide crystals found in the pills confirmed this. This level of preparation indicated intent. Daughter's testimony. The most shocking turn was the testimony of Stella's daughter, who said that her mother discussed ways to kill her husband even before the tragedy. The girl recalled strange conversations about insurance payments and plans that seemed frightening to her. But at the time she did not understand their essence. This testimony became key. It not only confirmed the motive, but also showed the cold calculation and thoughtfulness of Stella's actions. The Susan Snow connection. Why was Susan the victim? The investigation revealed that Susan was a random victim. Stella probably did not plan her death directly, but it was her bottle of Excedrin that was contaminated. It was a tragic coincidence, but it was what attracted the attention of the police and helped solve the crime. Now the case had become large-scale. It was not just the death of one person, but a deliberate act that could have killed many. The scope of the investigation. The FBI, food safety experts, and police officers checked stores, pharmacies, and all possible sources of contaminated pills. Every bottle found was analyzed for the presence of cyanide. All the evidence pointed to one figure, Stella Nickell. The investigation came together as a single puzzle. Homemade poison, purchase of contaminated pills, affiliation with husband, motivated by insurance payment, testimony of daughter, Susan's accidental death, which became the key signal for solving the crime. The beginning of the courtroom drama. The investigation moved to the arrest stage. Stella Nickell was called in for questioning. She tried to deny her guilt, claiming that she had no intention of killing anyone and that the contamination of the pills was an accident. But the evidence collected by the police was too convincing against her. For Sue's daughter, Haley, all this became a real nightmare. Her morning, which began calmly, now turned into the epicenter of a large-scale story involving greed, betrayal, and death. Each new day of the investigation revealed new details, new nuances that showed how carefully thought out the criminal plan was. Now everything depended on how the court would be able to collect evidence and determine Stella's responsibility. After the police had collected all the evidence, the case moved to federal court. The defendant was Stella Nickell, a woman whose life had seemed ordinary and unremarkable until then. Now the public's attention was focused on her every move. The trial began with a meticulous presentation of all the evidence collected. The prosecution's lawyers demonstrated that the contaminated Excedrin pills had been treated with cyanide at home, and that the algicide crystals found in the pills directly indicated human intervention. Investigators called a number of witnesses, employees of pharmacies and stores where Stella bought the pills, chemists and experts who examined the samples, relatives and neighbors who could report on the defendant's strange habits and behavior. Stella's interrogations. When Stella was called in for questioning, she tried to deny everything. She claimed that neither she nor anyone else had intended to cause harm, that it was an accident. However, prosecutors used a strategy of constructing a timeline. Purchases of contaminated pills, homemade poison, connection to financial motives, insurance payment for husband Bruce Nickell, testimony of her daughter, confirming that her mother discussed methods of causing death. Each of Stella's denials was confronted with direct evidence. Pill examination and experiments showed that cyanide contamination could not have been an accident. The investigation demonstrated that the poison was administered with precision and premeditation to ensure a lethal outcome. Daughter's testimony. The key moment was the testimony of Stella's daughter. The girl described how her mother discussed problems with her husband and insurance payments, mentioned pills and drugs. This testimony became the emotional backbone of the prosecution. The court and the jury saw that behind the facade of an ordinary family there was a carefully planned criminal intent. Extensive examinations. The FBI and forensic chemists conducted experiments to try to reproduce the method of contamination of the pills. All the evidence pointed to one thing: the poison was administered at home, and the process was carefully planned. Nickel knew what she was doing and understood the consequences of her actions. Defense strategy. The defense lawyers tried to focus on accident and unintentionality. They argued that Susan Snow's death was a tragic coincidence and that there was no intent. But the numbers, the examinations, the testimony of witnesses, and the defendant's daughter spoke against them. Every detail added up to a single picture. The crime was premeditated and carefully planned. The mood in the courtroom. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Each day brought new details. The jury watched the psychological game between the prosecution and the defense. Susan's family lived through every minute, trying to understand that their personal tragedy had become part of a large-scale process. The investigation lasted for weeks, with witnesses being questioned, data being analyzed, and re-examinations being conducted. Every element of the story, from the algicide found to the daughter's testimony, formed a mosaic picture of the crime. After months of investigation and interrogation, the trial of Stella Nickel began in federal court. The public and the media followed every step of the process, and the names of all the participants became known across America. Stella Nickel appeared in court, accused of deliberate poisoning and murder. The defense lawyers tried to build a line that Susan's death was an accident, that the connection with contaminated pills was just a coincidence, and the motive for an insurance payment was not sufficiently proven. But the evidence was against her. Chemical analysis showed that the cyanide was added at home. Several bottles of Excedrin from the same batch were contaminated in exactly the same way. Stella's daughter's testimony confirmed that her mother discussed the possibility of killing her husband in advance. Analysis of the chain of events showed that Susan Snow's death was the result of Stella's actions, albeit indirectly, but directly related to her criminal plan. The trial lasted for weeks. In the courtroom, the prosecution's lawyers methodically laid out the evidence. Documents, tests, witnesses, photographs of bottles showing crystals of algicide found in the home. Drama in the courtroom. It was especially difficult to listen to Stella's daughter's testimony. The girl, who had witnessed her mother's thoughts and words, looked at the defendant as if trying to understand how the person she knew could do such a thing. For the family of Susan Snow, the trial was a place of long-awaited justice. Every detail, every new piece of evidence, every witness brought them closer to answering the question: why did this happen to our mother? Final verdict. After carefully reviewing all the evidence, the verdict, and the arguments of the parties, the court found Stella Nickel guilty. She was sentenced to a long prison term, 90 years, without the possibility of parole. The reaction in society was mixed. On the one hand, many believed that justice had been served. On the other hand, the story of the poison pills was a reminder of how chance can play a fatal role. Aftermath. Susan Snow remained in everyone's memory as a victim of a random, but carefully prepared crime. Haley, her daughter, suffered severe psychological trauma, but thanks to the support of her family and friends, she was able to continue living, preserving the memory of her mother. Stella Nickel spent the rest of her life in prison, remaining a symbol of greed, cunning, and human avarice that can destroy lives. Reflection. This case became not only a crime chronicle, but also a lesson for society. It showed how easily a random victim can be drawn into a game planned by a criminal. One wrong step, one accidental death, and the consequences are irreversible. And although many years have passed, the tragedy of Susan Snow and the crime of Stella Nickel remain one of the most striking examples of how human greed and cunning can destroy the lives of innocent people.